Hey guys, welcome back to Star Wars Timeline. My name is Ben. I'm finally back from vacation and I'm trying to go back to my weekly schedule of podcasts every Monday. You might have seen some of them. Sometimes I invite a guest, we talk about different topics, something like Star Wars prequels, or recent podcasts that I've been doing with Meg from Meg Reviews, where we discuss the new Jedi Order book series, and so forth. Any and every topic concerning Star Wars we do right here on this channel. Today, I would like to propose a question, guys. I will ask it, answer it myself, but I would also love your personal participation. Let me know in the comment section below what your thoughts are, guys. I'm really curious what you think about this. And the question is, what is, in your opinion, the most iconic use of visual effects in the Star Wars saga? The answer could be anything that comes first to your mind. It could be the use of the CGI and the new innovative techniques that George Lucas created with Star Wars prequels. It could be the use of the practical effects or puppeteering that we saw in the original trilogy, and so forth. So in other words, this is not a question I'm throwing at you like film students or something like that. It's just something casual that all of us fans could enjoy and talk about, and it's more about your personal opinion and your impression. This is what really I would like to get at. And from my perspective, I would have to call out the use of the lightsabers and the blaster bolts that we see across the entire Star Wars saga that I find the most signature and iconic in this franchise. Of course, we had movies before, like for example, I was introduced to Star Wars in mid-80s, 1987. This is when I first saw the entire original trilogy on VHS tapes. But there were other films that I saw alongside Star Wars that were like space adventures and sci-fi. For example, there's a hugely popular Disney flick which came out in 1986 called The Flight for Navigator. This was actually done by Disney, and I believe it was one of the most popular films of that year. Obviously, it came out here in the United States. I saw it way back in Russia back then. It was Soviet Union. We got that movie playing in theaters, and I saw it with my classmates, and we were just blown away. And that particular film would use spaceships and miniatures and stuff like that. So we were already used to that sort of visual language. As kids, we didn't understand how it was done, but still it was something recognizable to us. Also, as a kid, I was growing up with a lot of fantasy films done by Ray Harryhausen. You guys may know him from his legendary film, The Seventh Voyage of Sinbad. This one was released in 1958 by Columbia Pictures, and it's legendary for its use of puppet animation. Now, the reason I'm bringing all of these movies as an example is something just to juxtapose it to Star Wars and say that we had something before like that, something that I've personally grew up with, and yet Star Wars, with its lightsabers and its blaster bolts, was able to separate itself and be completely different and such an iconic visual idea that I was completely blown away by it. One more example that I wanted to bring that I saw already when I was studying a film here in the School of Visual Arts in New York City was When the Earth Stood Still. Not the remake with Keanu Reeves, but the original one from 1951 by 20th Century Fox. And that particular film had this huge alien being, this robot walking around, and the way that it used the lasers particularly was so sharp, so crispy. If you guys go and just find it on YouTube, the effects hold up even today. You also see like a miniature spaceship at the end. Anyway, the way that they have done it back in the day was completely magnificent. And there are tons of other examples. But what made Star Wars completely change the game for me personally? So as I mentioned before, my introduction was in 1987, and I don't even remember watching them and identifying them as separate films back then. I was just a kid. To me, it was just one continuous story, and everything about it was so interesting and so fun. But when I saw the special effects on those blaster bolts and lasers, guys, I was just transported into a whole different world. I have not seen anything remotely close to it, and that's why I would pick it my personal as an iconic use of visual effects. And to me, it created a whole new experience. I mean, when we open up with A New Hope, right, and the Imperial Star Cruiser is after Tantive 4, and it takes over that rebel ship, that holy firefight scene that we see in the beginning, it was just completely new and different. Now, keep in mind, guys, that as a kid who grew up in the former Soviet Union, well, back then it was Soviet Union, we have a culture of watching a lot of war cinema, right? And we see like the Russians fight the Germans and the United Fronts, the Eastern Fronts, well, all of that ideas. But now I'm watching a war movie that is taking place in space. and they're using all this new technology. And my first question was, hold on a second, how it's done? I felt like I'm living for those couple of hours with those movies in a completely different reality. It was completely mind-blowing. So the first thing that struck me was, okay, first of all, these are really strange looking soldiers. They're all clad in this white armor. You can't even see their faces, and it's so scary. And then this black clad armor guy is coming out, obviously Darth Vader. And my first idea as a kid was, oh, he must be a general. He must be the guy in charge. Maybe there are more guys like him, but he's definitely the boss. And when you see that firefight between the rebels and the Imperials, that exchange of those red bursts of blasters and the smoke and fire and how it reflects in the actual background, the combination of effect and the real practical effects on the hallways, how they used it, it created such a tense and believable moment for me that once again, I was completely transported. I felt like I'm living in a different world. And, it gave me such a great sense of adventure, and I'm finally watching a movie unlike anything else. Once again, Russian kids and kids all over the world, we grew up on Hollywood cinema. We all saw Indiana Jones as kids. We saw the Back to the Future and the cool, flying hoverboard, and we all wanted one just like that. But Star Wars was something entirely else. I mentioned other sci-fi movies that I saw before that, like Flight for the Navigator, and other ones as well. Russia had its share of fantasy films created for kids with sci-fi elements, but nothing quite like it. This was so mature and so believable. My comparison was more to like a real World War II war cinema than just children's adventure movies, and I was just blown away by it. And then, of course, we move on in the picture, and I'm primarily going to use A New Hope as my example because that's the first film that I saw. That's the one that created the most impression on me. And then, of course, it took those visual effects and it extended them and made them even more interesting in the consequent sequels. But then we move on to that special scenes. I would say probably one of the most iconic scenes in Star Wars, where Kenobi's basically explaining to Luke what the Force is in his hut, and then Luke ignites his father's lightsaber. And just that sense of wonder that we get right along with our hero, Luke. He's like, whoa, what the heck is this? He's waving it around. He can't believe it. And suddenly my mind is racing. There's just an explosion of ideas and questions, and I'm looking at this lightsaber, and I'm thinking to myself, wait, how is it done? It has no weight, it's just like a flashlight. You guys probably remember when you were kids and you saw Star Wars, you just grab a flashlight and you go into a dark room and you like put something over yourself, like, and you imagine yourself to be a Jedi wielding a lightsaber, because all it was to us like a shaft of light. But at the same time, to kids, there's a sense of wonder when it comes to everything laser, especially in science fiction. And you think like, whoa, dude, this is the coolest thing in the world. This is not just like a regular sword. This is a laser weapon. It could possibly run through anything. It could cut any metal. It's like the coolest weapon in the world. And just as a kid, you can't help but be taken with it. And I felt that particular visual effects, it adds so much weight to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Later on, when he fights in the cantina, we see him as a seasoned Jedi warrior. Obviously, later on, he fights Darth Vader, but we just see he has complete mastery and control over this weapon, which made the effect so much cooler, and later on makes Vader so much more threatening. And if I remember, when I was a kid watching it on VHS tape, way back in the 80s, before any alterations to those films, George Lucas's special editions, the red versus blue colors on those blades were not very prominent. At one point, I believe they were just all glowing lights. And when the one blade clashed against the other one, you see just sparks of yellow. That's all you saw. I don't even remember the ideas of, good versus evil and red versus blue. Those kind of things were not running through my mind. Just the whole idea that this is a very thin laser-like weapon that just cut through anything, and it's so dangerous, I couldn't believe it. It was really, really amazing to me. And one other comparison I would like to make is that at the time, growing up in Russia, watching a lot of interesting movies, we did have a lot of cinema built around medieval knights and sorcery and fantasy films and sword fighting and stuff like that. There was a Russian version of Robin Hood film. There was a very, very popular Romanian movie which was filmed in 1967 called Daki. And it's basically the native peoples of modern Romania who fought against the Roman invasion. And back in the day, it was one of the most popular adventure medieval films in Eastern Europe. And we all saw, all these like guys running around in really cool armor, really cool outfits, and sword fighting, a lot of epic battles with the Romans. So that was already very interesting, and we were a lot into that. But once again, I'm introduced to Star Wars, and it's taking it in a whole different territory. It completely just rearranges the marbles in your head. You're like, what the hell? Like, you just look stupid looking at that lightsaber. A Jedi versus a regular knight, no comparison there. That visual effect alone, what ILM was able to accomplish back in the day, it just ignited a whole different level of excitement in me. It was really, really cool and awesome to see. But later on, going back to those blaster bolts, we are in the Millennium Falcon, right? And it's a very tense moment where they're escaping from Anchor's head, and the Imperials are right on their head after them, and they're trying to capture Millennium Falcon. And when Luke jumps into that cockpit behind the turret, and we see that level of excitement that he has, like, oh, I got one. He's targeting the TIE fighters, and he's capturing them. He's destroying them. And you see that turret just shoot those giant blaster balls and just destroying TIE fighters. It just looked so believable and so realistic. And once again, unlike anything that I have seen before. But also visually very interesting as well, because you always had a clear picture of what's going on. You always got, the way that they filmed it, you got the idea of all these TIE fighters surrounding and have different passes at a Millennium Falcon, and they're even trying to like take out the shields. And then when Luke is basically targeting it and shooting it, and then Han Solo is doing it from his cockpit, it all made sense. I was never confused as a kid. I think that also partially is very important to bring into this conversation. So it's just not the use of the visual effects, but also the way that the film is filmed, the way that the shots are positioned, and which even today, not a lot of science fiction is able to manage that. When the action is clear, and as a kid, you're never confused. You can follow the action. It makes it so much more exhilarating and exciting. And of course, at the end of A New Hope, that epic run, that sweet run on the first Death Star, that trench attack as they're running, and Darth Vader is there, and the Millennium Falcon comes to the rescue later on. Not only did the X-Wing and TIE fighters look absolutely amazing, they didn't look like regular saucers. They didn't look like regular sci-fi imagery that you saw before. They were completely new. The X-Wings, I can't even describe it. They look like fighter planes from World War II, but then they weren't. It's like in between something real that we see in daily life, but at the same time, this is a fantastical galaxy. This is unlike our world. And even as a kid, right away, obviously, you pick up on that. But there's once again that sense of believability. And once those shafts of light starts firing each other, and you see when the TIE fighters are destroying one X-Wing, and then the next one, when Wedge Antilles is out of the picture, and he's like, hey, Luke, I can't help you anymore. And Luke is there by himself, and then he shoots those 2 torpedoes. They fly right into this. Oh, man, it was just amazing. It was really, really cool. And of course, the consequent films, they made these special effects even better, even more iconic. And I think when we look on Empire Strikes Back, we look at the Hoth battle when the rebels fight those AT-AT walkers. Just again, these threatening giant weapons are walking by, and they're shooting these blaster balls, just destroying, decimating the rebel lines. It was completely fantastic. Obviously, Luke versus Vader's lightsaber duel was absolutely amazing. But I think what is happening here, first and foremost, you have amazing storytelling. You have powerful characters. You have these timeless, classic, heroic motifs. They are the reason that the special effects work. If you just had a cool lightsaber battle like you would in your Star Wars fan film on YouTube without any story, it would look nice for 5 minutes, and then you would probably forget it the next day. It would just be a novelty of some eye candy that you haven't seen before. But because A New Hope, because Empire Strikes Back, because Return of the Jedi are such iconic and powerful stories, the special effects, the lightsabers, the blaster bolts, they elevate the action, they elevate the drama, and they make it so much more interesting. If I can cheat just a little bit and go outside of my pick and look at the Emperor Palpatine's, his dark force powers when he like shoots lightning and Luke Skywalker, even that, you look at it, today you understand the way it was done. It was basically, animation, and they drew the lightning by hand. They put it in the film. Probably, in the Star Wars special editions, they revised it, maybe touched it up a little bit with Photoshop here and there, but mostly the effect is intact. It's the same one that we saw before, but yet it is so believable. It's so interesting and made the Emperor so much more dangerous and scary to us kids. So once again, it was the storytelling and action that sold the effects to us. And at the end, one last thing that I wanted to reiterate there, that continuously throughout the original trilogy, which I guess I'm sort of using by default here as an example, they continued to make the same effects that we saw in the previous films a little bit more interesting, a little bit more diverse, something added up to the formula that always kept it exciting. And what really excited me as a kid in The Return of the Jedi, when Luke ignites his lightsaber, it's green. It feels different. The shaft itself, the blade, even in the original unaltered versions, it kind of hummed differently. It felt a little bit different. I was like, oh, wow, this is an entirely new Luke Skywalker. He's more skilled. He's able to go versus Darth Vader and defeat him. And, partially maybe as a kid, I'm like, because he has this new cool weapon. So that was also very exciting. So one last point I guess I wanted to make is that not only the ILM was able to create some of the most striking and amazing visuals for the films, but they also continued to make it fresh and interesting for the audience. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, my little discussion of the iconic use of visual effects in Star Wars. Please let me know in the comment section below. What is your favorite one? Once again, we're not going by the standards with the film academia things, or all the experts say, or visual effects, or artists who work in the field. I'm interested in your opinion. What is iconic to you? What is your special relationship with visual effects in Star Wars? Maybe it's something that you remember from early childhood like myself, and it just stood out from the rest to you, and it's very, very special, sweet memories from childhood. Anyway, guys, thanks a lot for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you did, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss my future discussion with my YouTube friends that we discuss everything Star Wars on the channel. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you guys next time.